Okay, great. So it's 11 a.m. on my end. Welcome to the webinar hosted by the NABC on doing business in Kenya. Today, we actually have an excellent expert panel that is lined up to discuss key areas of potential collaboration on growth, trade, and investment between Kenya and the Netherlands. The objective for today's webinar is basically to highlight and identify the potential business sectors to facilitate such cross-border engagement. The expert opinion on this business relationship after COVID-19 economic disruptions will also be given. Now, to start us off, we will get to hear from the Ambassador of Netherlands to Kenya and the Ambassador of Kenya to the Netherlands to give their views on the theme of today's webinar. Now, before I ask the ambassadors to make their opening remarks, I will invite Mackenzie to introduce the host of today's session, the NABC. Mackenzie?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lyla, and welcome to everyone. NABC, I'll just make a very short and brief introduction to who NABC is and the work that we do. We were set up around 70 years ago, and our mandate is to do trade and investment promotion between the Netherlands and Africa as a continent. We have been working in a number of sectors, which include agribusiness, energy, water, amongst others. And we are glad that we have the expert panel that is here today to talk through the different scenarios, so to speak, and the opportunities that would exist now and post the corona pandemic. So for me, that would be the brief introduction to who NABC is, and I'm very glad that you are all participating, and thank you so much. I hope that this discussion leads to constructive dialogue, because it's evident that no one knows what the situation will be after Corona, but we hope that through dialogue we can make informed choices and decisions going forward. So thank you once more for all of you for your participation, and thank you to the panelists as well. And thank you, Lyla, for being the moderator for this session. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure, Mackenzie. Thank you very much for your introduction to the host today, NABC. Now, without much further ado, I will now call upon Ambassador Frans Makken, who's going to give his opening remarks on the bilateral relationship between Kenya and the Netherlands. Ambassador?
To start with, thank you very much for inviting me for this webinar. It's really very much a privilege to be speaking on this subject, and also very timely that although we're still in the midst of the crisis already, and on what should happen after and for the crisis, I think what it will be. Netherlands and Kenya bilateral relationship has always been very important. We've had a very long-standing development relationship since independence, but since then we have moved with Kenya in the sense that when Kenya became a lower middle income country, we switched from aid to trade. And I can say that in the world of all the partners the Netherlands has, that we are most advanced in Kenya when it comes to setting up a program that is particularly geared to private sector development. And in the meantime, the Netherlands is the most important export destination in the world for Kenya's agricultural exports. And overall, we're always in the top 5 of top export destinations of Kenya. So it is not a surprise that there is a very intensive and cordial relationship between the two countries. And in our private sector endeavors, we have been building on the programs that we had in the period that we were a development partner, namely in water and agriculture, food security, health, and the judiciary.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much for those insightful views. I especially like your argument about the switch from aid to trade and helping the private sector be far more developed between when it comes to relationships between Kenya and the Netherlands, I think of important take-home message is they raise the issue of job losses as a result of the COVID-19 disruptions, which has basically resulted in a regressed tourism market and other essential economic areas within the country, Kenya. I think it will be important for the panelists when they give us their presentations to give comments on how, for example, the job losses have impacted or may impact trade relationships between the Netherlands and Kenya going forward. But before we even engage them and we ask you to comment on the same, I will now invite the Honorable Lawrence Lenayapa, who's the ambassador of the Republic of Kenya in the Netherlands, who's going to basically give his opening remarks on trade and investment relations between Kenya and the Netherlands before and after COVID. Welcome, Sir Lawrence.
It was anticipated that maybe by mid-April, it was projected that about 5,000 Kenyans will be affected by this pandemic. And as my ambassador said, remarkable work has been done by the government and the health officials. So we must applaud and appreciate the government of Kenya and particularly the health team for that remarkable job. As said by the ambassador, Kenya and the Netherlands have enjoyed very, very cordial relationship since independence. And as he also stated that Netherlands, I think, has been ranked as one of the top purchaser of Kenya products within Europe. It is also important to note that about over 20% of our flowers get to the Netherlands. So we are one of the biggest. Netherlands is our biggest market, and my friend Fernandes, who is also with us today, will be able to confirm that. As stated by the ambassador, for the post COVID-19, PLM has added 2 more cargo planes that are specifically on cut flowers. And it is important that we note that with this trade between the Netherlands and Kenya, at least we are able to safeguard some jobs of Kenyans working in these flower farms. So it is very important to note that Kenya has had a wonderful, wonderful bilateral cooperation with the Netherlands. Our last team of senators, Ambassador can be able to confirm that, were here on health mission, and one of the key issues was they were studying the healthcare system in the Netherlands. That's one of the areas, and we also managed to meet the health Senate committee, and we discussed at length how Kenya and the Netherlands can enhance this. He stated and he explained very well our cooperation on agriculture, and various other sectors. On post-COVID-19, what has the government of Kenya done? The government has looked at various sectors to cushion particularly the most vulnerable people. Something on, the government has provided funds for the most vulnerable persons.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was great. I think you've raised excellent insights on the different sectors that are available for harnessing this business relationship between the Netherlands and Kenya. It's not just limited to the flower industry, for example, but also, like you said, the maritime industry that's actually there to facilitate this new sort of economic revival that we're all looking forward to following the post-pandemic era. We're now going to move into the panel session, and we have a great number of panelists today, and we're going to start off with Mr. David Ongolo, who is a board member of the Netherlands Business Hub in Kenya. So David, he's going to talk about the emerging sectors for foreign Kenyan private sector investment collaboration post-COVID-19 crisis. So David, as I invite you to give your brief presentation, I would probably ask you to comment on what the ambassadors have highlighted as key points with respect to harnessing and stimulating trade relationships between Kenya and the Netherlands, and to also comment, in your opinion, do you think the job losses that have occurred are going to in any way affect this trade relationship or not? Thank you and welcome.
But it's very, very, very clear that the current bilateral development program is really very well focused into specific areas that relates Dutch expertise with what the private sector can actually focus on in Kenya. In looking at what, in my view, would perhaps be some of the sectors where one would want to focus investment promotion post-COVID. When we say post-COVID, the people who are on the opinion that that post-COVID period might be 1.5 years from now. There's some who are a bit optimistic and saying perhaps towards the end of the year, then things should start coming back to normal. But I'm always on the opinion that in terms of catalyzing trade and investment, it's always good to be a first mover, to start thinking well in advance, such that when that opportunity comes for the rest of the investment global community, then at least here is at least a group of investors who have thought that through much, much earlier. And looking at from that perspective, I would want to perhaps narrow this down, looking at two aspects. The medical interventions to COVID, post-COVID, as well as the income and economic interventions that would look at particular sectors or post-COVID. If I look at areas where one would really be looking at strengthening and collaborating in a post-COVID era, purely through a medical intervention, then obviously we can think of several areas that one would want to focus on. And His Excellency already mentioned the Dutch-Kenya platform on health that is looking at specific interventions. But if one goes back to even as late as just a few months ago, and His Excellency Lenayapa did mention this particular area as a focus of Dutch-Kenyan investment.
Thank you, David, for stressing the importance actually of digitalization and innovation as core investment areas to be thought of post the pandemic era. So I think we will be looking at how we can now leverage digitalization as a new sort of an economic model going forward in strengthening the ties between Kenya and Netherlands. And we will discuss this with KEPSA and the other panelists who are on board. Now, I'd like to introduce Mr. Richard Fernandes, who's more commonly known as Kiki, and he's the founder. He has basically founded the cut flower company called Kariki Limited in Kenya in 2001. So Richard will be speaking about the impact of COVID-19 on the flower industry in Kenya and the expectations for post-COVID-19 era.
So where we are right now is we're seeing that the demand has picked up in Europe, but the biggest problem we have, the biggest constraint we have right now is lack of capacity on the air freight side. And so we're in a position now where we have a demand in Europe, but we have the flowers sitting in Kenya and we're unable to actually meet the current demand due to constraints on the air freight. So the logistics side is the biggest constraint we have right now. The demand is not back to where it was beforehand. And so just to cite, I think, some statistics, before COVID, we were exporting about 5,500 tons a week mostly into the Netherlands. Today we have a weekly capacity, which is pretty well it's quite secure, of about 12 to 1,500 tons. That is against a current demand. It's a bit difficult to estimate it because we can't actually meet the demand, but the demand has come back to about 3,000, 3,500 tons a week. So there's clearly an enormous deficit. We're unable to meet the current demand, and so that continues to put pressure on the sector's cash flows. I'd just like to share with you that, of course, for those who don't know, the main reason why Kenya is very strong and dominating its position in the cut flower sector is because of altitude on the equator. And if you spin your finger around the globe, you only get altitude on the equator in two places. It's in South America, in Ecuador and Colombia, and it's in Africa, in Kenya and Ethiopia. Post-COVID, I think what we're going to see, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty about how quickly the air freight will come back. We obviously recognize what KLM and Martinair are doing, and that is big recognition. Thanks to KLM and Martinair for coming in to support us. But as we said, there's when will we get back? When will the freight come back? That is a big constraint, a big concern. We're seeing that the demand is picking up. It's also picking up globally, but the air freight logistics side is a big constraint.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kiki. I think you've given us a very good perspective into the cut flower industry and the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages that can help investors make up their minds. Pius himself, he is actually the managing director of NABO Capital. I actually had to look this up, and NABO is actually a Maasai word which means number one. So actually the number one African investment firm. Happy for you to be here, Pius. You're going to be presenting on an investor's perspective on how investments will be affected post-COVID-19 pandemic. So what to do and what to avoid.
I think the one thing that the common thread of the lessons that we've learned from COVID-19 is one word: underinvestments. Underinvestments in agriculture, underinvestments in healthcare, underinvestments in education, underinvestments in technology, underinvestments in security, innovation. Everything that has been exposed by COVID is underinvestment. And it just points to a statement I like saying: in Africa, we have more opportunities than the money that we have. Where in the developed economies, we have more money than the opportunities that are there. And I like saying again that if you really want to make a difference, the best place to be is in Africa. And this is because of the glaring gaps. And allow me to just give one example of glaring gap that we can learn a lesson from that was there 20 years ago. And this was the telecom sector. In the early 1990s, a SIM card was going for about 2,500 shillings. That's about $25 today, using today's exchange rate. And today, the same SIM card goes for about 99 shillings. That's just under $1. And then Safaricom had just been formed as a company, as a subsidiary of Telecom Kenya, and it inherited 17,000 customers. And between that time, the year 2000, when Vodafone UK invested, and became and partnered with Kenya government, the number of subscribers, mobile subscribers in Kenya is now standing at 50 million subscribers. 20 years ago, if I got a call that my grandmother is unwell, it would have taken me 3 hours drive to get to her and take her to hospital. Today, a similar call, it will take me less than a minute to send money to someone very close to her, and within no time, she will be getting some medical attention. And for me, I'm just calling out on all the participants who are on this call, and they are looking at Kenya from an investment point of view. We have significant glaring gaps. I'll point out agriculture. With COVID, the key thing that is coming out, if this was to continue for some period of time, then food security becomes the most discussed topic. Everybody is striving to make sure that there is going to be food on their table. And it will not be about money, it will just be about, can you really put food on the table? And agriculture is the driver, is the engine of this. The last time I checked, we just had a just countable number of MRI machines in Kenya, in Nairobi. And Nairobi has 6 million population, just countable. And people are paying, those MRI machines are running for 18 to 24 hours. People are paying 23,000 to 35,000 shillings, just because there is limited supply. Healthcare is definitely a place to look at. Education. We have all of us, we have our children at home. Education has moved to our homes, and parents are going to seriously consider going digital. Schools are going digital, and schools were not prepared for this. This requires massive investment, and we do not have enough capital unless we work with partners from other countries like Netherlands. Security is going to be a key thing. With everything going digital, it's not just going to be just the traditional security, but also we're talking about weaknesses that can be exploited on the digital space. Cybercrime is going to become a big career space for many of the young people. We have 75% of the population 35 years and below. We have 50% of the population 15 years and below. Every day we wake up and go to work. Half of the population goes to school, or they are left at home.
Thanks, Pius. Thank you so much. I'm now going to invite the CEO for KEPSA, Ms. Carole Karuga.
And so we've seen, especially our manufacturing sector, begin to do some, to say, because like e.g. the apparel sector, there's less demand of apparel in the world that we're exporting to. Can we now produce apparel for the local economy, because we're also getting less coming into the country, but also can we turn ourselves to producing PPEs? That is all the health essentials that are actually every country is looking for some. And so can we satisfy our own market and then move to the region and look at exports of PPEs, because we have our export channels, because as apparel sector, we've been doing this over a long time. And so that's what has been happening on that area. And we know one of the companies that moved very quickly into that, they've had to increase their employees with another 800 on top, just to meet the demand of PPEs. And so those are kind of the innovations we are starting to see. Then the second thing of the innovations is where actually the questions come in, especially on technology. And so what businesses are doing more, and Richard did mention this, even when the flour industry that was affected, we started to see them exploring some online sales, which is a good way to start thinking. And they got a bit of that before we started thinking as the market started picking up. But we're seeing a lot of businesses move to online. And so as KEPSA, we've even partnered with one of our e-commerce organizations, Jumia, to really help businesses and especially small businesses to be able to do businesses online.
So thank you all for participating in this webinar. I would like to encourage you, if you have any questions, feel free to address them to gunalvinka@nabc.nl as the email addresses and says, and we will channel and direct these questions accordingly to the different panelists. So thank you once more, and we will stay in touch. Thank you.